In this video, we'll explain how to create workflows. We'll cover the basics, show how to model a workflow, and demonstrate how forms and input screens are used. In the Processes menu, you can create not only processes but also workflows. A workflow is an automated process that structures recurring procedures and controls them efficiently. It is based on a process model that defines the sequence and uses input forms in which the relevant data for the individual work steps is recorded. You can create a new workflow by right-clicking a process group in the Processes menu or by using the Create New button. Now, we are modeling an action workflow. It serves to automatically guide a measure from the creator to the responsible person for implementation, and finally back for a thorough review. You can now see that this is a workflow. This becomes clear through several indicators in the content area. On the one hand, there is an option to enable the workflow for users, and on the other hand, the buttons for the form designer and the workflow settings are visible. The process model of a workflow differs only slightly from a process model used in process modeling. However, for a workflow, additional workflow objects are used. Now, the modeling of a workflow is shown using the example of processing an action. The modeling begins with creating the action. Unlike in a process, no task is required for this, because the inputs are made in the main form, which is linked to the start symbol. Now we begin with editing the main form. When the form designer for the main form is opened, you will see the workspace on the right, where new fields can be created, edited, and their order can be changed. On the left side, you will find the available fields. You can drag and drop a field into the form and then configure it. Now the fields are added to the form. First, a selection list is added to define the activator, meaning the person who initiated the measure. Here, you can add the individual selection options. Using the drop-down field names, you can set whether the field names are displayed above the fields or on the left next to the fields. You can also change the number of columns in the form. Using the preview, you can see what the form looks like in the case. Now we start modeling the process model for the workflow. First, the main form is forwarded to the person responsible for the measure. For this, the object forward case is used. You can configure the forwarding in the object's workflow engine. For example, you can specify that the receiver is taken from the responsible field in the main form. Once the action has been created, the intermediate event changes the workflow status to action created. You can change the color here, which is displayed next to the status in the case list. Now we use a task, because the action is now being implemented. Now, the related form is created to confirm the implementation. In the implemented field, we have two options for the editor of the measure: yes or no. To determine whether the measure was implemented, a decision is used to direct the process depending on the result. Now, you can add a condition in the workflow engine. We select the Implemented field from the form of the task, Confirm Implementation. A path for Yes and No is now modeled. If the measure was not implemented, an email with the explanation is sent to the creator. Now, we can add predefined text blocks to our email. They can be easily defined in the settings, allowing us to smoothly insert standardized messages with just a few clicks. With the timer object, you can now set a deadline for the implementation of the measure. The object is always placed between two events, here between the start event and the measure implemented event. The deadline is determined by the date field in the main form. If the deadline is not met, an email is sent to the creator of the measure. Once the measure is implemented, it is forwarded to the creator. The creator then checks its effectiveness. If the result is positive, the case is closed. If the result is negative, the check result is sent back to the editor with new instructions for reprocessing. The workflow is now complete. To start the corresponding case, you can now set the workflow to active in the workflow settings. Now, the case can be started either via the specific action case menu found in the context menu, or through the general case menu. Now, the action is being created and forwarded to the responsible person along with the corresponding details. Now, the person responsible for implementing the measure can simply state if the action is finished and add a quick description of how it was done. Once the implementation is confirmed, the action is routed back to the creator, who can then review its effectiveness. If the result of the review is positive, the corresponding case will automatically be closed.